Well, welcome back from lunch, everyone. We'll start the next session, which is titled as Business Automation in 18 Months. Our presenter on the topic is Bob Allen, who is the mastermind behind this automated workflows and form system that comprises of more than 6,000 employees and more than 60 disparate offices, campuses, and facilities. And the system was put together in only 18 months. That's pretty amazing. Bob is the director for business applications and processes at Frisco Independent School District in Texas. He is a veteran in information technology and business process management. Bob has more than 32 years of working experience in a wide range of industries, which includes banking, financial services, military services, systems, as well as business process outsourcing. So please join me in welcoming Bob Allen.
It's always kind of funny. I hear that military systems thing. I spent like a year doing stuff for the military when I was at EDS. Thank you. I am very happy to be here today, and we're going to cover a wide range of things, really. I sat in on a presentation earlier today, which I thought was awesome, by a city that had done some work, and they were touting statistics and some of the things they've done. I thought that was great. Wish I'd kind of put some of those in here, but we're going to talk about more of the philosophical things, how we've got to where we are, what we did, why we did it, and how we managed to have it be accepted. So, first a little bit on Frisco ISD, because you really have to understand the context of what we were doing. I worked at EDS, HP for about 30 years, and I went to work for the Frisco Independent School District. And the idea was that the school district was growing so quickly that we had to do something so that we could add teachers in classrooms and not have to add administrative staff to do things. And you really have to understand the growth that goes with Frisco to understand why that was necessary. But it's a commitment to smaller schools. When I first moved to Frisco in 1992, there were 3 campuses. Next year, there'll be 61. So some phenomenal growth. Enrollments increased by 3,300 students, or about 7.7% over the previous year. We have more kindergarten students than we do seniors today, and quite a broad range of demographics for students. If you look at our growth and where we're projected to go, right now we're at about 46,000 students. We're on our way up to about 63,000 right now in the forecast. We're just in the process now of evaluating that. We think we're going to wind up at about 80,000 when we're finished. And if you look at just the past few years, you'll see that the spike has been very significant, but the percentage is really the killer here. Frisco, Texas, from 90 to 2010, increased 2,500%. The second fastest school district in the country that we have been able to find is Leander, and it grew at 500%. So Frisco's growth is phenomenal. That really gave us the challenge of what we were going to do from a technology perspective, and that's really why I went to work for the school district from EDS. We have 6 high schools. We have a 7th opening this next year. We have an 8th opening the year after that. We have 5 schools opening next year, including 3 elementaries, a middle school, and another high school. So continuous growth. One of the things I've realized at this conference is that y'all have really, this is a message I share oftentimes with organizations that really do not understand what you understand. So it's exciting for me to be in a group of people who get the fact that, okay, this is about electronic content management. You're going to save money on documents. That's a good thing. Oftentimes I speak to groups, they really don't understand the concept, and so I have to spend a lot of time explaining to them about studies from whether it be McKinsey or Deloitte, whoever it is, talking about the expense of a paper document. So I'm not going to bore you with all that today, but I am going to remind you that it adds security. You can easily locate documents. You can share documents. We'll talk about some of the things we've done and how those have been important to us. And we'll also spend a lot of time talking about the integration strategy, because that really was the big part of what we were working on. When I first presented this topic, if you will, or this solution to the school board and to the district, I did so by saying it's an electronic content management tool, because I knew they would understand that. But I knew they wouldn't understand the whole workflow opportunities and the things that you can do with workflow. And so I really needed to get the application there, get it on the ground, and then we needed to look for the other opportunities. As I said, in my mind, the opportunities are absolutely endless. This thing can be used to buy toilet paper, or it can be used to improve student graduation rates, and everything in between. It just depends on the application and how you use it. And I challenged my team, a couple of them are here, because I believe we're really only truly limited by our own imagination. The things we can think of, the things we can envision, we can build, and we've built a number of those already. So the opportunities, it can be used as an integration layer, that's important, and you'll hear me hit on that a lot because, again, it's a document imaging tool, but workflow is the incredible component that brings all that together. Workflow can monitor and generate actions even without a form involved. We're using workflow to communicate application to application without even a form. We're just triggering an event, we're updating a field from one system to the next. So we're using it beyond what traditionally you might think of as an ECM product. Obviously, you can search for documents. I used to do some work for a company called A.T. Kearney, a consulting company. They said never put more than 7 bullets on a page and never more than 7 words on each bullet. I get carried away sometimes, and so I apologize for that. But you guys can get all these online, and I'm not going to spend my time reading all these to you. The last one's very, very important, though. With the implementation of Laserfiche and with the implementation of the workflow tool, the forms tools, and the document imaging tool, we were allowed, or it gave us the opportunity to establish what I would call best practices in business process automation. That's really important. We've gone into various departments at this point. We have gone through a process where we re-engineer that business process, and then we're enabling it through the technology of the workflow tool. And that's critical when you think about, you have all these disparate systems. This is a very amateurish picture that I had put together early on, just trying to identify what some of the software applications were that I supported. Many of these, I wasn't even sure what the name of them was the first time I found them. But in a school district, and I don't know how many of you are actually in education, but in public school systems, there's a huge number of applications. Everybody went out and got something so they could track, athletic, time over here, or that they could do something special over here for special ed or for education, whatever. They all went and got their own solution. But what they never thought about was that those platforms don't talk to each other. And so as you pass data from one system to the next, someone physically had to sit down and do that. And that's white space that comes in between each one of those applications. So this was our basic starting point. And then I'm sure this must be a Laserfiche slide, or it's a DocuNav slide. I'm not sure. DocuNav is our vendor that we use. But this was our starting point. We've already exceeded this as far as the capabilities and things we're doing within the district today. But this really was kind of the catalyst of that conversation we had, where we realized how we would be able to utilize the workflow tool. Then in building a more specific kind of view, I wanted to break it down into what were the applications we had and how were we using them today. The key was, by bringing the workflow tool, allowing us to integrate all those different systems, now we're in a position where we can communicate across those applications. I no longer have to have someone entering data at all those different data points. We're talking, we have a vendor that we use for our e-school tools, a vendor called SunGuard. We have a vendor we use for our e-finance tool. It's a vendor called SunGuard. Those two don't talk to each other. It's the most bizarre thing ever, but they are not integrated even within their own applications. We, on the other hand, use this tool to accomplish that. We have some other tools that we had put in place simply for the purposes of data validation, some of the student performance. All of those play into it now because we're allowed to use those almost as a social media tool feeding back over into the student performance tool. And again, the electronic content management piece is really made up of the systems integration, the workflow, and the forms engine. And we use all three of those extensively. The presentation was talking about 18 months. We've actually been 2 years now. And a lot's happened since I had originally spoken to Linda about some of the things that we'd accomplished in the 18 months. We've already far exceeded a lot of those things as well in the last 6 months. So I want to take you very quickly. Again, I know you understand the forms tool, but this was helpful in that we had to explain this, articulate this, and be able to make sure I'm not missing anything I wanted to share with you before I get to this point. We wanted to make sure that our board and our users community understood the power of what we're trying to accomplish here. So forms made easy. We have it set up to where I don't even know which of the workflows this is, but it could very easily be a student transfer form. We have the parent enter the student ID. We'll then go out to the rest of, we'll go out to our system, we'll gather the rest of the information, plug in the metadata. They've basically entered one piece of data. We can populate the rest of the form for a student transfer per se. We pre-fill the data. In this case, this is a form we were working on, workflow we were working on for student success, where if a teacher, is anybody in here in public education? Is anybody? So if I say RTI or some of those things, the early recognition of student performance, this was one of those where they could go in, they could pull up data on this student or fill out data on the student based on their answer there. Obviously, then we can provide some additional breakout of the additional documentation or metadata to be plugged into the system. For us, we started, I think I probably got that in here somewhere. We started with, what release were we on, Zach? 8. We started with 8. We went to 9 because we wanted to go to the 9 forms as quickly as we could. Turns out I think we were the first one to go to the 9 forms, and that was a little discomforting. But after a couple weeks, we worked through the details there, and we're able to use that as our initial implementation because we wanted to use functionality like this in the system. Workflow obviously is the magic piece of this. It brings all these things together. It allows us to process that form. It allows us to send it down whichever path is appropriate based on one path or multiple paths. We can do it in a way that I need 2 people to approve it. I need 3 other people just to know about it and acknowledge it happened. We have a lot of extensive workflows that we've put together so far. Also, the metadata component. We had people that would keep track of everything. They'd keep a copy of every document they had, and then they would sit down and enter that document into a spreadsheet so that they could keep track of the fact that they had that document. And then they would send it over to somebody else who would make another copy of that document and enter it into a spreadsheet to know that they had a copy of the document. And so basically what we've done now through the metadata is we allow them to keep track of it dynamically. So if you want a spreadsheet of what you've got, you just go do the search, you pull it in. Basically, you can create your spreadsheet on the fly now with whatever information you're looking for. I had, I think I talked about, shortly I'll talk about some of the projects, but we had, we do accounts payable now, where we are doing 2-way and 3-way match to pay the bill. It seemed crazy to me that we had a purchase order, we had a receipt, we had an invoice, and yet we still had someone who had to physically sit down and look at that, reconcile that, and figure out whether or not they wanted to pay the bill. We've automated that now through workflow to where we just go pay the bill. We put it out into a pay file, we communicate it over to the e-finance system, and then the next time that cycle comes up, it'll process the pay. But we also had started pushing that out to the individual departments to enter their own invoices. We're bringing invoices in electronically in a number of cases now, working directly with suppliers. But in some cases, Bob's Balloon Shop is never going to be able to give me electronic invoicing. And so what we do now is we push that out to the individual departments to scan those documents and bring those into the system. Had an opportunity where they wanted to keep track of how much money they were spending on a boiler at a particular campus facility and how much they had spent over the last year or so. They used to keep track of that in an Excel spreadsheet. But now what they do is they simply pay the bill, go back later, look it up based on the metadata, extract it out into an Excel spreadsheet. It takes them all of 30 seconds to do, something that they used to do and would take hours and hours and hours. From a project perspective, as I said, our vendor is DocuNav. I really do enjoy dealing with DocuNav. Don't want to make it a DocuNav commercial, but I've really appreciated the support we've got. We signed our original deal in April. We upgraded to 9.01 in February of last year. We use extensively the content, forms, workflow, business process reporting, analytics tools. Our initial agreement called for implementation of 3 departments. We wound up implementing the HR department, which consisted of HR, risk, payroll, and benefits. Then the next department we went into was accounts payable, accounts receivable, where we have put a number of workflows and integration layers in place there. We're also doing some things with curriculum. We're doing homeless student tracking, where someone out at the individual campus, trained in determining whether or not that student classifies as homeless for purposes of governmental reporting. That used to be a process where an email would go forward and someone would have to go into the system and update records and update data, and systems would have to talk to each other across the student and finance system. All those things happen automatically now or independently. We're getting ready to start working on expense reporting next. We've also pushed out the invoice processing to organizations like fine arts and maintenance and transportation, utilities. They all pay their own bills now. They all keep track of them in ways that they never could before. And the beauty of that is that although they're spending slightly more time entering the invoice, the accounts payable department is spending significantly less time double checking work that was already approved and taken care of. I would guess that one integration alone has probably saved 6 to 12 man months a year, just on the fact that we now pay those bills based off of the entry from the actual user of the tool. Again, integration strategy based on using workflow. And we've looked at it from a number of different perspectives. And I will go through this list in a little more detail, not to bore you, but because I think each one of these things are significant. The employee handbook distribution, the way that used to work literally was someone would make copies of the paper copies of the handbook, 50 pages. And then that would be sent to every employee. Every employee would get the signature page, sign the signature page, and send it back. Now, that sounds easy enough. But it was a secretary at the central office building doing it. And she would send it out addressed to the individuals at each of the campuses. We have 60 campuses now. So everything you do, you multiply by 60. They would keep track of who got signed. They would send it back. They would make copies. That process would take at least 6 man months to do. Today, that's embedded within the onboarding process and in our annual update process, and it takes seconds. And what we do now is, if a person hasn't responded to that, we'll send out another notification saying you haven't responded. And if a third time the person hasn't responded, we can now copy their boss to say, oh, by the way, Mary is not responding to this. You might want to go have a conversation with her or him. We do driver's license, Social Security cards are all automated now. At the time the person is hired, we scan the card. We're done with that. We don't keep track of it. We send it to the appropriate department so that they have access to it. Employee leave notifications to payroll, that used to be phone calls and emails and, oh yeah, by the way, hallway conversations. That doesn't happen anymore. Our risk campus, our risk guys are using this out at the individual campuses. They're taking pictures. They're using their iPad. It's coming in. It's updating to the system based on an issue they find or an incident or whatever has to happen there. All of their field service reporting takes place out there, and that's passed back through. The electronic contracts, again, another area where every year the secretary at central office building would make 3 copies of the contract. She would stack them up in alphabetical order. She would put them in with the individual campuses, and then they would interoffice those out to the campuses. The campuses would get them. They would go through the process of Excel and putting them all together, and then track them back in again, and they get put in the person's file. Those contracts go out today. We wait for the automatic acceptance, and we process. We put it into the employee file accordingly. We keep track of all the child nutrition invoices. Again, that was an interesting area where if you're at a campus and they deliver a load of milk or ice cream or whatever it is, they give you an invoice. Well, the person at the campus would make a copy of the invoice, and they'd put it into an Excel spreadsheet. And then they would put them into an envelope, and they would send them over to the central building for child nutrition. Child nutrition would take that, and they literally would cut and paste and tape them to some other pieces of paper to where they were all on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. Then they would make a copy, because everybody's got to have a copy. They would then get in a car and bring them over to the admin building so that somebody at the admin building could take each one of those individually and now key them into the system so that they would pay the bill. The lady in child nutrition, I thought she was going to kiss us when we said, you don't have to cut and paste those anymore and put them on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. Just scan them into the document. And oh yeah, by the way, scan a whole bunch of them in at a time and just go ahead and pull them, build the metadata. And actually what we do in child nutrition was we built an interface to where they have their own separate accounts or a purchasing system, if you will. But we could use their system to go pull data that would become metadata. We'd feed back into our system over on the other finance side. So they had an they had a purchasing system that they were using. That purchasing system had a connection to the official purchasing system, but not really. And so we used their other system, so we've integrated to that system so that we can bring data back through at the time that they're entering the invoice, and then we can make that data available over on our e-finance system. We're working right now on the whole employee request for transfer process. That'll be coupled with our new school openings. Next year we'll hire about 800 new teachers. And so we will be in the process of going back through our onboarding. The way our onboarding works today and what we had built for the last year's cycle was for professional hires. We had an issue where everything was paper, and the application would come through and employee would say, or someone who wanted to be employed or thought they had been hired would say, I need to give my notice at my other employer, but I don't want to do it until you guys have really given me the official, you've hired me. And we'd say, oh, don't worry about it, you're hired. And they'd say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go do that. And so they would call periodically and say, where am I in the process? Well, we had 5 people working in HR, 5 or 6, 7 people working in HR, and whoever was unlucky enough to answer the phone now went off on their task of figuring out whose desk their folder was on. And they would have to go find that folder and figure out where it was, where it was in the process. Then they would eventually come back and say, I found your folder, we're waiting for your fingerprints to come back, or we're waiting for you to submit a document or whatever it was. But generally speaking, that delay was about 15 minutes. So from the time, that I answer the phone to the time I get back to working on what I wanted to be working on to begin with, I've wasted 15 minutes. What happens now in the onboarding process is that as soon as we extend that person an offer, we've got their private email. And we start communicating now through workflow and email, and we send a notification out to the person and say, we are extending you an offer. Here's what we need you to do. Now, throughout the process, whether it be fingerprints, background checks, transcripts, whatever it is, we're communicating with that individual via their private email address. Then what we do, once we've actually converted them and we've given them their credentials to get inside our area, we send them notification through workflow again that says, here's your new email address, here's your credentials. From here on, use that to get through the process. We tell them how to go in to do their online video training so that they understand how to navigate through the HR system, so that they understand what it means to be an employee at Frisco ISD. We send them the notification for their handbook and ask for them to approve that. All of those things happen now literally without anyone having to get involved. It's all automated. It's all workflow. We just kind of keep track of it. And next year, we'll be doing the same thing with transfers and other noise-making devices. We keep track of the professional, what we call PDOS. I don't know if that's what you call them in every state, but Texas calls them PDOS. That's the reviews, essentially, for teachers. We keep track of those. We pull those into the system because the system they're actually done in isn't as reliable as it might be. One of the things I really liked about Laserfiche when I started looking more closely at the tool is that a lot of applications in K-12 public education are not what I would refer to as industrial strength and bulletproof. For the most part, applications that have little crayons as icons scare me. So this application is more robust. We have much more confidence in it. And so we pull data out of other systems just to store them in this system now. And then we turn around and send the teacher back a request saying, before we had to get their signature on that document. Now we just send them back a request that says, this is your review. Do you agree that you were there when you got the review? Yes. We send a notification off to the principal to say, do you agree this was a review? Yes. All that's built into the files now. And the other thing at the very bottom, I know a lot of places had to go through the process for the the Affordable Care Act. You had to go through all kinds of notifications, and our benefits department came to us, asked us how we could help. We wound up building that into a workflow. It took 2 or 3 days to build the workflow. We sent the notification out to all employees, not just our full-time employees, but also our part-time employees, to make sure they understood what they had to go through. Again, I've got some workflows in here. I assume everybody's going to be able to get to this later, but we talk about the actual transfer process, everything I just described there. This is, one of the challenges we found in Laserfiche was the fact that we had non-licensed users that we needed to be able to generate forms. And so the answer was, hey, you got public forms. That's great. Well, public forms is truly public forms. What we needed were public forms that were actually kind of internal forms. So we had to build our own authentication layer, if you will, to make sure that we could identify if it was really an employee internal to us, and if we were, we'd handle them differently. This is an example of how we do that for student transfers. We assign the metadata. We look at the campus information, process this through. This is another area that probably saves 4 man-months a year in just the amount of work that the other people do, and it significantly improves the feedback of the parents who are interested in doing the transfers. So how do we get all that done, and what were some of the things we did? To me, in the background of EDS and going into the school district, I had to reset some basic philosophies, if you will. And the first thing was I needed to make sure everyone understood we weren't implementing a technology. It's people, process, technology. Technology's listed third because it's really the easiest one out of all of them. We had to convince them that it was not a software installation. It was a multidimensional, complex change to the way they do business. And once we got past that, we could go focus on things like re-engineering. In our HR department today, I have an initiative underway where we are basically looking at every process tied to HR. And we're redoing that. We're using that in a Lean Six Sigma kind of business process re-engineering initiative that allows us to extract that out and truly understand what the business process is that goes with that. I spent a lot of time, again, doing this for companies all over the world. And what I used to use a quote from Edwards Deming that I think always applied, and that was, if you can't describe what you do as a process, then you don't know what you're doing. And the key with that is, if you can give it to me in a process, I can build it into a workflow. I can't. I mean, guys that are here that work for me can't. But I know they can, and that's really the only important part that comes with it. So the idea is, get them to sit down and really map out the process, because then it's much easier to take into a workflow than it is trying to build the plane in the air, if you will. Because if you go in and say, okay, I can give you a workflow for that, and they say, well, this is the way it works, and then 5 minutes later, you're doing it, and they say, yeah, but you forgot to do this. You really have to get them to explain what it is that they do with the process. And the key was, any tangible benefits that you do with the technology really has to come through process improvement. And although it looks funny, it really is true. Never pave a cow path. Do not go in and try to make something work that really has never should have been that way to begin with. And since inputs are static, they're always the same, process has to change if you're going to improve the outcome. Everything I do at the district is based on, as I said, kind of a Edwards Deming or Dr. Michael Hammer around Lean Six Sigma and ERP implementations. Lean Six Sigma is back after World War II, as it gets off on a sidebar story that really is meaningless. Back after World War II, Deming went to Japan to help Japan rebuild after the industrial, or after the war, and Japan became very successful because they focused on the important things. They focused on the customer. Customers are both internal and they're external. They focused on the improved process. They focused on teamwork across those, and they made every decision they made with data and facts. That's what this house is really showing you, is that if you take that approach, those then solutions that you build into the workflow can truly be successful. And the other thing I learned working with teachers is if you put up a chart with the circles and some little arrows around it, they start to get it. They feel at home then at that point. But the key was really allowing them to see what was capable and what were the, not just what the vision was, but what the opportunity was. And the way we approached it was we gave everybody something. We looked at it, I've done it in a lot of different ways, but felt like if we could give everybody something, that then they would start to see the benefits of it, and they'd start to embrace it, and they'd start to pull it to them. Now that's a double-edged sword, because now I've got everybody wanting something more. And so it's a challenge. But we had to really convince people that really all we were trying to do was fix change their existing job. We weren't trying to displace them. And it was important. At EDS, I did work for General Motors, Hilton Hotels, Federal Mogul, furniture manufacturers. I did things for companies all over the world. And we would go in as consultants and tell them, oh, this isn't about cost reduction. Don't worry about it. We're just going to improve efficiency. It was always about cost reduction. It was always about headcount reduction. The beauty at Frisco is that it was never about that, and never will be. Again, we're growing too fast. It can't possibly be about headcount reduction. It's about helping those people do new jobs and do their jobs in different ways, creating new jobs, giving more control. If you think of everything as a giant funnel, I want as many people out there using this tool thinking they're in charge. They're responsible for their own destiny, and man, look at all the things we can do using this tool. But you bring that down through a central control point, and now what you can do is you as leaders can make sure that they're doing it the way you want them to do it. They're buying it from the suppliers you want them to buy it from. They're working within the requirements of expense reporting guidelines, whatever all those things are. They feel like they're in control, but truly leadership's in control. And the other thing was, and this is true at corporations and it's true at school districts as well. Everybody's kind of their own little fiefdom, if you will. Principals are all in charge of their own little world. Department heads are all in charge of their little world. And what happens is a department thinks of it in terms of, I've got to get it out of my area. So they basically take a catapult and they throw it over the wall and it lands in your area. Now it's your problem to deal with. It's a concept I refer to as, save a dime, spend a dollar. What happens is they work so hard over here to make sure that they're doing all they can to reduce and reduce and reduce. And what they don't understand is they're putting more work over here. That's what happens to you when you don't have the integration. That's what happens to you when you don't have the coordination between departments. That's what you use tools like workflow to get around. Because if I change the process for companies, and I used to go to companies and we'd come in and say, hey, good news, we're here, we're going to help you re-engineer your business process. And they go, oh God, here we go again. Because it happened time and time and time again. The key here is when you change that process, you enable it through technology. You use workflow to put the guidelines in place that say this is the way it's going to work, and so that way you don't have the likelihood that eventually over time that's going to erode. It really comes down to the best way to reinforce it is to give them a enabling technology tool that makes sure that they indeed are not going to start getting around the system. People have an infinite imagination when it comes to working around the system. If they would work half as hard to make something new work as they do to figure out how to kill it, you'd always be successful. But we're very lucky at Frisco ISD because the people there really are embracing the change and they're really helping us be successful. Success or failure, I can pretty much tell you whether you're going to succeed or not. If you think of it as a technology implementation, you're done. There are things, the organization's got to be ready for the change. We were lucky at Frisco. When I first came to work there, the superintendent who had coaxed me away and to come to work there explained to me, he said, I don't want you doing anything for 6 months. I don't suggest anything, don't tell anybody anything, just stay out of trouble for 6 months. And I really didn't understand why, but it came down to, I really need to understand that new culture. Education is a different world, it's a different animal. For those of you who work in it, you understand that. For people like me, it was a hard concept to understand. But it also gave me the opportunity to get the organization ready for the change that was coming, to get them ready to accept it. I had executive leadership. I had executive involvement. I had the superintendent looking at everyone saying, we're going to do this, do what he says. And so that made a huge difference for me. We actually had to communicate with all those organizations and let them know what we were doing. We sat down with each one one-on-one. I explained all these things to them. We told them all about the tools we were going to give them, and then we went and gave them those tools. If you think about it from a perspective of the challenges that you have to address early, you have to get people to look at the big picture. You can't have them believing that if I take care of my little piece of the world and they take care of theirs, it'll all be fine. That doesn't work. You've got to have cross-enterprise buy-in and cooperation to be working together. Ill-advised specialization approach implies if you take care of the pieces, the whole will take care of itself. It won't. From a functional agenda perspective, looking at it more holistically leads, or less holistically leads to a common set of mistakes. You sub-optimize the process. You constrain flexibility in ideas. You generate focus on all the wrong problems. You place the needs of the many behind the needs of the few or the one. And you overlook the fact that automation alone is not worth the effort. You've got to have the business process change that goes with it. So, the greatest business problem for contemporary organizations is process change. It really is. You've got to be able to map it, but it's as simple as ordering a pizza. That can be put into a process in 5 minutes. And then you can go automate that process using tools similar to these. The last one here, most organizations undergoing re-engineering transformation apply a concept of deception. So what they do is typically they say, well, we have to change the process because we've got this new technology. And what they really should be doing is embracing the fact that we can change the process because we have this new technology. But oftentimes they try to hide behind that instead of giving them a legitimate need for change. As I said, my team, I've got a team of about 11 people. I've painted a picture on the wall and said that's where we want to go. And then I try to stay out of their way and help them get and let them help me get there. I've got one person that I would say has been doing workflow for about the last year and a half. I've got a couple more that are good at it and just starting to do more of it. We're going to have a total of about 5 people doing workflow. We're going to have a total of about 2 people involved in forms creation. And then I've got 2 or 3 other people that are spending a lot of time on business process reengineering, business process improvement. So I've painted the vision, but they're the ones paddling the boat to get me there. If you want to fail, position it as a technology initiative. Don't have the right amount of resources. Wait for decisions. Rework. It's always fun. If you don't overcome the resistance to change, then you're never going to get there. Make it implementation. Don't make it a technology initiative. Establish a rapid set of decision making. Time kills things. And I tend to, sometimes to my own and the team's own detriment, I tend to be very decisive in what we're going to do, and we just go do it. That's good and bad. I like it. Not sure they always do, but it gets us down the road. And then also, you've got to minimize the list of good ideas. I mean, they're all good, they're great ideas. Put them in a parking lot, come back to them. If you try to do all things for all people, you'll never get there. This is probably the same stuff I've already said. Again, building commitment, climate for change, organizational participation, implement, sustain it. One that I always, and the reason why we started out, we tried to do small little things because we didn't want to delay the payoff. We wanted everybody, as soon as they were getting involved in it, to see some opportunities out of it and see some benefit out of it. And so that's really the way we approached it. Each department's different. For example, we went to the HR department. That's where we started. We started scanning contracts and scanning employee files. We then went to the accounts payable procurement department, and the first thought from the team was, well, we need to start scanning purchase orders. To which I said, well, time out. We've got the purchase orders. They're electronic. We've got another solution for that. We're going to bring those out of the system and integrate them into our environment electronically. So every department you go into, I'd love to say it's science. I'd love to say, hey, it's cookie cutter, do them all the same way. And it really isn't. Every department is different and unique, and it's more art than science. And you really have to look at it from a perspective of where do their documents come from, how do they use them, what are their workflow or what are their business processes, and what are the things you can put in place with workflow to reinforce those. Get the training teams involved early, because nothing scares people more than things they don't know or don't understand. At the same time, you can't overwhelm them with all the stuff it can do. This is a really cool platform. It does a lot of stuff. They don't get it. What you have to do is say, here are the 3 buttons you need to remember to push. Push them in this order and you'll be fine. We use a lot of business process for explanation and next steps and some of those things, but you still try to keep it minimized as far as what they have to know and remember, because some of them, it just scares them to death. Also, and if there's a complaint about Laserfiche, we started on 8, we went to 9, talking about 9.1. I heard people talking about 10 today. At some point, I've got to kind of tap the brakes and pull back and say, I've got a stable environment. I just need to let it go for a while, simply because too much change and constant change of things is somewhat unreasonable. And you should never expect too many people to change. I think this is the last slide. The whole idea is to kind of restate it. We really believe, I really believe, we are limited only by our own imagination. We start with, we establish the climate for change. I've got the whole district on board with that now. We engage across the enterprise so that everybody on each side is seeing it, and we're creating sustainable change. But for me, it's really just the beginning. And the way I explained this to the board recently in a presentation I was doing for them, think of it as a manned mission to Mars. And we just basically have shot off a bottle rocket. There is so far to go, and so much we can do, and so much more that we're going to do over the next year or two, that I think it's important to keep it in perspective. This is really just the very cutting edge beginning of it. And being tenacious will be able to make it last. So that's my 45 minutes I promised you, and happy to take any questions. And the hard questions will get directed to my team.
Thank you, Bob. And since we're recording the presentation, I would appreciate that you ask the question into the mic. And just raise your hand, I'll bring the mic to you.
The first question I want to ask is, what would you say overall was the most important part about getting your team together to be ecstatic about doing the change, going with the enterprise content management versus the historical way you guys were doing things? Was it hard to get them on board with, hey, we're going to go this way and try to push?
I get it. there are probably still some people there that aren't on board. But really the approach we've taken is, I've offered input to every department. Some departments were more responsive, and those are the departments that I spent my time with. If it was a department that did not seem as interested, I certainly didn't push it on. But literally, blind in a public education environment, from my perspective anyway, blindfold me, I'll throw a rock and hit an opportunity. They're everywhere. And so if you have a department that isn't too terribly excited about doing it, that's great. Wish them well. And then what you'll find is, once they start looking over the shoulders of their buddies in the other department, they'll say, whoa, wait a second, I want some of that. And so what we found is, if we get our nose in the tent, we're pretty much there.
I'm real curious. You mentioned many times throughout your presentation about the system. Is the system Laserfiche, or you're pulling all of the other disparate systems that have been bought over the years and workflowing and building the process from there?
Right. I had an interesting sales call about 6 months after we had originally signed and started implementing Laserfiche. Oracle came to visit me. Now I'm an ex-EDSer, right? So I know the Oracle guys really well. And my first response was, how the mighty have fallen. Because why are you guys here at a little school district trying to sell something? You got to be selling something to the state of Texas. But they came in, they wanted to spend time with me, and so they drew this picture on the board. They said, put your systems out there. And so I kind of painted a picture of all my systems. And then they plugged in Oracle database in the middle and said, here's what we can do for you. Every night we'll talk to your systems, and we'll bring that into this database of all your data, and we'll have it all together for you, and you can report off of it. And tomorrow morning you can make updates, and we'll send all the data back out. I said, well, that's a nice picture. I kind of like that. Let me show you something. I erased Oracle database, and I put Laserfiche workflow. I said, I'm done. So to me, it was a strategy where we knew we had all the disparate systems. We host most of them, but not all. We have to, again, not always science. Sometimes it's art. We have to do some finagling in our design, if you will. But anything we can communicate with, we can take the person out of that. We have security systems that we use for visitor registration. We're going to automate those to where we go out and we do background checks automatically. It's really anything we can think of so far we've been able to do. Now, sometimes I feel kind of like I'm a hammer looking for a nail, because people come to me and they say, can you do this? I go, oh yeah, Laserfiche can do that. And then I have to stop sometimes and say, well, is that really the best decision? Because we have other tools. We can do other things. Over 9 times out of 10, though, I come to the conclusion I'm probably just going to use this tool to do it. And so far it's been a really plus for us. And we looked at several other applications and vendors and decided on this one primarily because of the workflow. And we love our resale. But the workflow was the big one.
You mentioned about building a custom authentication layer for forms. Can you elaborate why you had to do that?
Well, you have public, maybe it's not going to be true after 9.1 or whatever, but for us, we had public forms, and a public form to us may be, I want a parent to be able to submit a document. So, or a public form may be, I just don't want to give a license to a teacher that's going to submit a request for something. And so what we had, and once you make them public, they're public. Everybody gets to see them when they're public. There was no public-private forms. That would have been cool, but they didn't have that. So we had to create a layer that allows us to have that teacher or that employee submit a request. We take it against our Active Directory. We validate, it's internal to us, and then we email them back the form that they need to fill out and send to us. That way we don't have to give them a license. Licenses, a school district that has 6,000 employees, right now I'm limiting that to people that actually have hiring authority or some type of management approval authority. I'm not giving it to teachers or students or anybody else. I think it's kind of a cool solution to get around it, but I'm hoping that future releases of Laserfiche will take that requirement away from me. It's just something else we have to build into every time we do it. We replicate it, and I don't have a clue how many workflows we have running right now, but I guess there's 1 or 200. And so as you start looking at some of those, and something changes, I don't want to have to go back and change it 10 places. This is great. I thought you guys were going to leave me standing up here and I wasn't going to have anything else to say.
How many Laserfiche licenses do you have?
I think we have 300 today.
You mentioned a lot about how you're integrating with your other systems, your SIS, your finance, your HR, reporting mechanisms for student achievement. Do you find it difficult to keep up with updates that have to occur to those systems to keep the integration going?
No, we're, well, we're 18 months, 2 years into it. Could a lot more go wrong, and my team's telling me now about, they're warning me about technology debt, which is the, we're going so far so fast, we really ought to stop and shore up a few areas to try to make it so we're not doing everything different or different ways or spreading ourselves too thin on it. What I've promised them is we're going to tap the brakes after this next cycle of things we're doing and allow us to go kind of stop and reevaluate and figure out from a maintenance perspective, are we building up so much debt that's going to come back and haunt us later? I think we're okay at this point, but we're going to work on some better, maybe more standard integration layer that will help us get past that, I think.
Okay, with school districts, they tend to want a lot of collaboration and committees. How did you strike a balance between input and efficiency?
I'm not sure I'm real popular. No, I try to be collaborative, and I try to bring all the groups in. At the end of the day, Frisco's a unique environment. Everybody truly is concerned about doing their job and doing it better. And what I found in that 6-month period of time where I really was trying to stay out of trouble was these are people that do heavy lifting. They're carrying large buckets of water, and they're making sure that every employee is paid every week on time and whatever it takes. And what I found was that dedication, that commitment, really they were just looking for help because they were so busy carrying water they couldn't stop and see that somebody needed to build a pipeline. And so it's been relatively easy to get them on board. As I said, groups that show little interest I don't spend a lot of time with, but there's plenty of opportunity with the others. And they're all coming around, so they all will. Small, how do you eat an elephant? Small bites.
Do we have any more questions? Well, thank you very much, Bob. That was very enlightening. And thank you very much for participating. Our next session will start in 15 minutes, 2:45.